So many good, godly Christians have been sitting back and doing nothing. They love Jesus, they read their Bible, but they sit back and don't do anything. Get off the sideline, get into the game. Let's make a difference for Jesus in this nation. America seems to be a country that is without a knowledge of spiritual things today. We hold fast to deceit and we refuse to return. Over the last 50 to 60 years, America has had a serious moral deterioration. John Wesley said it like this. He said, "What one generation tolerates, the next embraces." And our tolerance has given silent permission for morality and common sense to be suppressed into extinction. It kind of reminds me of the phrase, and I don't know who originally stated this, but if church becomes optional to one generation, it becomes irrelevant to the next. So for those of you who come to church about every 5 or 6 weeks and you think, oh, I'm raising my kids in church, just beware. If it's optional to you, it's going to be irrelevant to the next generation in your family. I encourage you to make going to church a consistent weekly pattern in your life. And that's not the case for a majority of American Christians. American Christians that actually go to church do not go on a weekly basis. It used to be the old phrase, 3 to thrive, where you would go to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. And now it's transitioned from an active Christian going to church 3 times a week to a really active Christian will go 3 times a month. And that is not healthy. I encourage you to come to church when the doors are open. And sometimes when they're not open, you could at least help with the exterior of the property, right? Anyway. Over the decades, we've moved from, you think about this, even when I was a boy, I'm 40 years old now, but you think about this. We've moved from decades ago, no curse words or bedroom scenes in television or movies. And now pretty much everything that's on TV is too vile to watch if you're a follower of Christ. Now our commercials and common behavior would make the citizens of Sodom and Gomorrah blush. I want you to think about something that happened with the Supreme Court a few decades ago, and it's led to what has happened now just from a cultural standpoint. The Supreme Court struck down school prayer. And this simple invocation was prohibited by the highest court in the land. This is the quote from this invocation that was struck down by the Supreme Court. "Almighty God, we acknowledge our dependency upon you and beg your blessings on us, our parents, our teachers, and our country." End quote. That was it. No mention of Jesus. It was just a simple petition asking God to bless 4 things: the students, the parents, the teachers, and the country. I want to address those groups of people as we look at the American public for a moment. And we ask the question, why has this people slidden back? Think about students for a moment. It's shocking that this has happened over the last 4, 5, 6 decades, that the invocation struck down by the Supreme Court called for God's blessings upon us, and that was referring specifically to students. Now, what's happened over the last 50 to 60 years in the American education system and with students in general? We have the highest rate of teen motherhood in the Western world now. Our country does. We forbid the Gideons from passing out Bibles in schools, but many school districts, thank God not Farmington, but many school districts in our country encourage the handing out of condoms in school classrooms. You think about parents. So we've talked about students very briefly. Parents, the petition asked the blessing of God upon our parents. Now, what has happened to parenthood over the last 5, 6 decades? We lead the world in divorce. Not only in teen motherhood, but in divorce. And I'm sure that goes hand in hand quite often. But sex abuse seems to be running rampant, unfortunately, even in churches. and the home is disintegrating in America. Think about teachers for a moment. Over the last 50 to 60 years, 44 years ago, in 1980, in the case of Stone versus Graham, the court decided, this is a quote from the court system, in the case Stone versus Graham, if posted copies of the Ten Commandments are to have any effect at all, it would be to induce children to medicate upon them and perhaps obey, and this is not permissible for them to obey the Ten Commandments. The First Amendment protects it, end quote. God forbid that a child obeys the Ten Commandments. So what's happened as a result for teachers? Well, there's been an increase in school violence. School shootings have increased rapidly. I listened to a sermon this past week of a guy celebrating that it's been a year and a half since the school shooting in Nashville with the manifesto. And that's a celebration that we haven't had a school shooting in a year and a half. SAT and ACT scores are going down right now. They're not going up. Let's address our country briefly as you ponder what the Supreme Court struck down when it came to that prayer. Our country, 50 to 60 years ago, compared to now, violence, in terms of violent crime, is up 500 times over what it was in those days. It is no longer safe to walk some of the great cities of America. You think about, would you go on vacation right now to Memphis or Detroit or San Francisco? I'm naming some of your hometowns, by the way. I know that. I see a couple of y'all whispering when I mention a couple of your towns. Chicago. Probably the scariest city in America today is Chicago. Why is this the case? Why has this occurred? Here's why. Because so many good, godly Christians have been sitting back and doing nothing. They love Jesus, they read their Bible, but they sit back and don't do anything. Get off the sideline, get into the game. Let's make a difference for Jesus in this nation.